Hi, and we're back here with a new guest for Mark chapter 3. And it's a very special guest, obviously, for me. This is my wife, Carrie. But more than my wife, she is very skilled and experienced in the world of ministry and mission. She was a missionary for 3 years overseas, and I like to call her the International Woman of Mystery, 003, if you will. But no, she would say that she was born in the pew. She grew up in the church. Her dad was the youth director here at Bethel for a bit back in the 70s, and then went on to pastor a few churches, and one church in particular where we came from in Florida. So she is very well versed in all of these things, and I'm excited to hear her heart on these next few chapters. She's going to be with us for Mark chapter 3, chapter 8, and chapter 13. So I'll be looking forward to those other as well with Carrie. But to get us started here, Carrie, we are in chapter 3. We've just gone through Mark chapters 1 and 2. We're seeing very quickly the establishment of Jesus as the king, this authority that he has now, not only over just the world, but over illnesses and diseases, and him really trying to school and teach people why he came. And so here we are in chapter 3, and it's more of the same, and I would love to hear your take on it. So take it away.
In Mark 3...
Right now, it's just good.
Okay.
Just kidding. Go ahead.
In Mark 3, I think we get a chance to see a little bit more of Jesus' heart and Jesus' compassion, because it opens with him in the synagogue. And again, it's one of those situations where the Pharisees and the teachers of the law are waiting. They're waiting to see Jesus mess up, fall into a trap, so that they can, continue in their plot to take him down, to discredit him. So he's in the synagogue, and there's this man with a withered hand. And Jesus says to the man to stand up. And he looks at the Pharisees and he looks at the teachers of the law, because he knows that they're waiting to trip him up, because the Sabbath was such a big deal and there were so many rules and regulations about it. And so he actually says to them, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill. But Jesus knows that in their hearts that there's this stubbornness, there's this heart of heart going on. And so he actually ends up healing the man. And of course this irritates the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, because again, to them it seems like he's flouting the Sabbath and their various rules. We also get to see how many people are following Jesus, and the massive amounts of crowds that push in, want him to heal, to the point where he actually has to have his followers get him a boat so that he can actually get some distance from everybody. We also see him appointing the 12.
What do you mean by appointing the 12? So we've already seen some people being called. What does it mean to be appointing the 12 now?
Well, he's specifically pinpointed these 12 people, and they're saying, I want you to specifically follow me. I want you to be my disciples. I want you to follow in my footsteps, so that you can go out and do what I'm doing. And then we end with this interesting situation where Jesus is sitting in a house, and again, there's a crowd. It's this interesting dynamic of him interacting with, again, the crowd and the religious leaders that are there, but then also his family enters into it, which I think it's kind of this awkward scene, because I know personally sometimes when I read it I feel a little uncomfortable about it, because they actually talk about his family comes and they're like, well, he's out of his mind, we need to do something. But while that is going on, again, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law have come and are again questioning him, and are actually accusing him of being possessed by Satan, by doing these things in the name of Satan. And so Jesus actually ends up speaking in parables, and he says, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would Satan be working against himself? A strong house, a house can only stand when it's strong. When it's divided within, it crumbles. And then again, it pans back over to his mother and his brothers, who are again looking for him. And Jesus ends up saying this interesting thing of saying, who are my mother and my brothers? And actually says to the crowd, you are all my mothers and my brothers and my sisters, and you all are my family, based on whoever does God's will.
Right. Wonderful. Looking at some of this stuff, I know other interesting things that you brought up with the calling of the 12. I always find it, very interesting that of the 12, Judas is named, even though Mark says Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him, knowing full well the end of the story for Judas, but here he is being appointed and he's being charged and given the authority to do all the things that all the other disciples do. And it brings me back to, it just brings me to this statement that I think everyone is worth it. I think in Jesus' eyes, everyone is worth hearing the good news, experiencing his compassion, etc., even though not everyone will reach out and accept it. But they're all worth hearing it. It's all worth being proclaimed out, which I thought is very interesting. I also like with this, if the house divided cannot stand, we always attribute that to Abraham Lincoln, but it's actually Jesus who coined the phrase. But I also like, as it goes on, but no one can enter the strong man's house and plunder his property unless he first binds the strong man and then plunder his house. And I had to read that a couple of times, and I think, Jerry or Jack Watson can correct me if I'm wrong, but I look at this as Jesus it's kind of like, almost like a prophecy, as like Jesus has come to enter into this strong man's, this Satan's house, to bind him and then take what Satan has tried to destroy. And that's just also cool to see there too. It's kind of like a, yay Jesus, go get him. So, but as you looked at this, Carrie, were there any teachings that were slightly difficult? You mentioned a little bit about the awkwardness that you feel with the mother and brother. So is that a difficult teaching, or do you want to explain that a little more?
I just think it's something that when people read it, it initially takes you back. It's a moment of like, what do you mean, Jesus? I mean, this is your mother, this is your family, these are your brothers. Why are you not,
Right.
Though it did remind me that sometimes, there are situations where as Christians we have to, do the thing that's not necessarily great for our family. Later on in Mark it talks about, that we're going to have to take up our cross and lay down our lives. And so I just think that's something that I've had to meditate on a while, just in terms of, what does it mean in this situation of, obviously if we're thinking, mother and brothers and children of God and brothers and sisters in Christ, I think it's kind of the premise of, when they talk about how, marriage doesn't necessarily exist in heaven, and it's because that we'll all just be brothers and sisters in Christ. So I don't know what you thought about it, but that was something that just stuck out to me, just this interaction with his family that might make some people uncomfortable when they read about it.
The fact that he's saying that, the people in front of me are doing God's will, these are my family, it almost seems like he's rejecting his family.
In a sense. And then I think there's also this awkward thing of, you would think, but it's an example of, when it talks about how a prophet's not welcome in his own hometown. I mean, even his family is looking at him and saying,
right.
He is out of his mind.
Right.
And not fully understanding what Jesus is doing. But I guess that's kind of a theme of Mark.
Well, and I think it's not so much that he's rejecting the family, he's rejecting the family's attitude. Their attitude of like, we got to stop them. As we go forward, actually, Carrie will talk about it in Mark chapter 8, when Peter confesses Jesus is the Christ, and then a few verses down, he's telling Jesus that he can't go and die, and Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. And I think what it is that when you are counter to the flow of where Christ is going, that's where the rejection comes. Like, if you want to be my family, if you want to be my heavenly family, you will do the will of God's will. And that goes for his birth mother, his birth brothers and sisters. Because obviously he doesn't reject them. I mean, from the cross, he says to his mother, right, to the disciple, here's your mother. So he's still caring for his family in that regard. But it is more or less a heightening of God's will. That doing God's will is not always popular. And that means for the crowds and the Pharisees, we got that, check that off the box, but also for your family could be against us as well. And I have to wonder, although I know your family and I know that they were very supportive, but did you, in your own personal experience in going into missions, did you feel that pull of like, I really want to stay with family, but I'm really being called? Did you feel that also, that sensitivity there?
Yeah. I mean, there's a huge tension when you choose to do something like that. Just because you do have family members who are looking at you and saying, is that really safe? Are you going to be okay? That's a really long time to be away, and to not only time, but that's a very long distance to be away, when you're 12, 13 hours away by plane.
Right.
it's hard for family. And then you have your own struggles of like, maybe, can I be away from my family? Can I, go off and be on my own without that support network?
Right.
Or only feeling that support network from far away. So yeah, there's definitely a tension.
Yeah, and that's important to, and maybe you all could discuss that in your small groups too. That's important to understand about really faithfully living out God's will, or the call of discipleship, and sometimes it does bring about hard decisions. And they really can have great redemption in them too, in the midst of them being difficult decisions. But at first you kind of have to work through those waters, because a lot of times doing God's will doesn't make sense to the world. And that's a shame, but eventually it will. I think eventually the Spirit works and moves, and people's eyes are opened, and that's all good stuff. So anything in here that you just love, that you just gripped your heart, and it's like that warm blanket, like, oh yeah.
I really, again, and I kind of said this at the beginning, being able to see the heart of Jesus, and that, Jesus looked at these people, this man with the shriveled hand, and sees his heart, see who he is, and heals his hand, even though he has the religious leaders and so forth looking at him like, you can't do that on the Sabbath. That's considered work. And I just think it's interesting. He says, which is more lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill. And I think he's trying to get the Pharisees to look at it from not just a letter of the law, this is it has to be done, but really more looking at the spirit of why the Sabbath was created. As we talked about last week, in terms of the Sabbath was created for man, not man for the Sabbath.
Right.
So I like that we continue to see Jesus in Mark doing things where he's loving people, healing people, caring about the person, even in the midst of a society where the man was probably not loved or cared about because of his deformity.
Right. And even the crowds too. The crowd's reaction to him, you would think would be good in the fact that they want to surround him, but there does come a point where it's that the crowd's getting too much and they're too hyped up on the signs, and Jesus is like, it's not just about the physical deformities and the illnesses. There's more that's happening here, and which we will see when the gospel takes the turn and turns its attentions to the cross. Now we'll see that this is the more. So excellent. And then each week I ask the same question, and so hopefully you're not getting tired of it. But it's the thrust of why we're doing this series, encountering Jesus and walking in His ways. And we want to know, how does this chapter challenge us to be like Jesus, to walk in Jesus' ways?
Well, I think one thing is that idea of looking at people more with compassion than with, you awful sinner, you for, doing the things that you do. Or so getting caught up in the rules and regulations of quote unquote Christianity, and forgetting about, that God is love, and that we're called to love our neighbor and we're called to love God. And, because how often can we become like the Pharisees or the teachers of the law, just in terms of, we know what's right and we know what's wrong, and sometimes, someone knows what's right and wrong, but they need to have a heart behind what Jesus came for. And then I also just think, again, it's this idea of realizing who Jesus is, as he's speaking these things and has the power to, cast out demons and heal people, and kind of resting in that. And, this is the God that we follow, who's perfectly and completely in control, and who, did go into the strong house and, did bind up Satan, and do all those things. And that's something that we can keep in the back of our mind when we are called to those times of tension, when we're called to do something that, potentially other people in our lives don't understand, to know that we're following a God who's big enough and is strong enough to be with us in those times.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good job. She did it. But we'll have 2 more chapters, so don't, rest easy. We'll be wearing the same clothes because we're filming them all at one time. So there goes that mystery. But we do hope that you have a wonderful evening, afternoon when you are looking at these videos and talking, and hope that we brought up some stuff that would be great for you guys to discuss. So until next time, where we look at Mark chapter 4, have a great meeting time, and I'll see you then. Take care.